The air at the Apex Gala was thick with the scent of champagne and quiet ambition. Beneath the soaring, gilded dome of the grand ballroom, the pillars of power in Formula One didn't merely stand, they postured, their smiles as curated as the guest list. Max Verstappen, dressed in a sharp obsidian black suit that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, navigated the room with the practiced ease of a predator. He was not here to celebrate, not truly. He was here to observe, to listen, and to dismantle. For years, the gala had been a cathedral for the sport's old guard, a place where reputations were minted, allegiances forged, and futures quietly decided over crystal flutes. This year, however, a new tension hummed beneath the polished veneer. The system was showing cracks, and Max had been the one to strike the first blow. His public challenge to the opaque financial regulations, his open condemnation of the gentlemen's agreements that kept power centralized and stagnant, had turned him from a revered champion into a political dissident in the eyes of many. He saw them now, the architects of the very system he sought to reform. At a corner table, a gaggle of team principals laughed, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their phones. Their laughter was a performance, a brittle facade meant to project an image of solidarity. Max knew better. He knew their unity was a fiction, bound only by a shared interest in maintaining the status quo. Their power was a house of cards, and he was holding a lit match. Max had been told to be discreet tonight, to mend fences. His own team principal, Christian, had sent him a half-dozen frantic texts urging him to be civil just for tonight. But civility had never been his currency. His power wasn't in handshakes and feigned camaraderie. It was in the blunt, unvarnished truth, delivered with the force of a battering ram. He was a champion forged in the fire of competition, and he approached political battles with the same single-minded ferocity. His gaze swept the room, landing on George Russell, who was holding court by the main bar. Russell was the embodiment of everything Max was up against. Handsome, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo, he moved through the elite with the effortless grace of someone born to it. He was a protege of the old order, a rising star who had been groomed to lead the new generation. But unlike Max, Russell's ambition was rooted in acceptance and assimilation, not revolution. He sought to climb the existing ladder, not to burn it. Russell caught his eye and offered a thin, almost too perfect smile. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a challenge, a subtle signal that he was aware of the political dance being performed. Max offered a curt nod in return, a promise that he would not shy away from the dance. A figure detached himself from Russell's orbit and strode towards Max, Lando Norris. Unlike Russell, who was all smooth lines and polished surfaces, Lando was a study in controlled chaos. He wore his ambition like a second skin, but beneath the jocular public persona was a mind as sharp and as calculating as any in the paddock. He was also a product of the established hierarchy, but he was a more dangerous foe because he understood both sides of the divide. He saw the flaws in the system, but he believed he could manipulate them to his advantage, a true Machiavellian. "Max," Lando said, his voice low, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Good to see you out of the paddock." "Likewise, Lando. Though I expected you'd be on the podium tonight. Seems you have a knack for being there at the right time." It was a jab, a reference to Lando's recent run of luck that had seen him capitalize on the misfortunes of others. Lando's smile tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "Some of us just know how to play the game," Lando replied, his eyes flickering towards Russell before returning to Max. "It's about more than just speed, isn't it?" "Always has been," Max conceded. "But lately the game seems to be less about racing and more about who controls the chessboard." Lando chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "And you, Max, are threatening to flip the board over entirely. That makes a lot of people nervous. People with very long memories." "Good. Max said, his voice flat. They should be. With that, Lando gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head and walked away, leaving Max to consider his words. It was a warning, delivered with the casual brutality of a friend who was no longer just a friend. The lines between competitor, rival, and enemy were blurring, and the Apex Gala was the ground zero for this new war. A bell chimed, a musical signal that dinner was about to be served. Max found his assigned seat, a strategic move by the organizers, he was certain. He was placed at a table with a number of senior figures from the FIA, the sport's governing body. They were a wall of power, a bastion of the very system he was trying to dismantle. Across from him sat an older gentleman, a former team principal, now a quiet kingmaker, a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne had a reputation for being an astute political operator, a man who built empires with whispers and subtle gestures. He had the air of a contented spider, waiting for the fly to land in his web. Max took a slow sip of water, his mind already calculating the angles. He knew he wasn't here to dine. He was here to be tested. The gala was a public stage, but the true battles were fought in the quiet pauses between polite conversations. The first volley came from the FIA's head of finance, a woman with a glacial smile named Helena. Max, your recent comments, they've caused quite a stir. Some would say they border on insubordination. Insubordination to what? Max asked, his eyes holding hers steady. The truth? The financial regulations are a labyrinth. They are designed to protect those who benefit from the lack of transparency, not to ensure a level playing field. If speaking the truth is insubordination, then I suppose I am guilty. Helena's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. There is a process, Max, a structure. You can't just go rogue. And what good is a structure if it's built on a foundation of sand, he countered. I've spoken to engineers, to strategists, to mechanics. They're all drowning in a sea of red tape, while the money, the lifeblood of the sport, is being siphoned away into dark corners. We're losing talent, losing teams, all to protect a system that is fundamentally corrupt. Thorne, the quiet kingmaker, finally spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a heavy stone. Corruption is a strong word, Max. Careless, perhaps. But corruption implies intent, and intent is a difficult thing to prove. Max leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Intent is in the results, sir. When a team gets a slap on the wrist for a financial breach while another has to lay off half its staff to meet the same rules, the intent is clear. The rules are not meant to be fair, they're meant to be selectively enforced. His words hung in the air, a raw, unvarnished truth that contrasted sharply with the gala's polished surface. He felt the weight of every eye at the table, the silent disapproval, the simmering outrage. He was no longer just a driver, he was a political force, a public voice for the voiceless, and a thorn in the side of the establishment. The conversation shifted, the others trying to steer it back to safer topics. The weather, the upcoming season, anything to escape the uncomfortable reality Max had laid bare. But the tension remained, a phantom limb that everyone was aware of. Max let them talk, his mind already 3 steps ahead, anticipating their moves, their counters, their next gambit. He was in the middle of a strategic game of chess, and he knew it. He had to be careful not to make a move that would be exploited against him. His challenge was not just about winning the race. It was about winning the war for the soul of the sport. The gala was just the first battle. Suddenly, a presence next to him broke his concentration. George Russell had pulled up a chair, a glass of water in his hand, his perfect smile firmly in place. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. Russell's arrival was a calculated move. It was a public show of unity, a way of signaling to the others that he was the voice of reason, the peacemaker. But Max saw the glint in his eye, the subtle hint of a challenge. Russell wasn't here to de-escalate. He was here to corner him. Max, I heard your passionate speech, Russell said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. I agree that there are issues. Transparency is key. But you have to understand, we are a family. We can't air our dirty laundry in public. It undermines the sport. Family? Max scoffed, the word tasting like ash. Families don't bury their problems and pretend they don't exist, George. That's a conspiracy. Let's not get dramatic, Russell said, his smile still in place, but his eyes were like flint. I'm trying to find a solution. My team and we've been working on a new proposal, a framework for more equitable distribution of funds. It's a work in progress, but we are taking the high road. We are trying to change things from within. He was good, Max had to admit. Russell's words were a poison-tipped dart. He was painting Max as a reckless renegade, a disruptor without a plan, while simultaneously positioning himself as the mature, responsible leader. It was a masterful piece of political theater. Max took a moment, letting the silence stretch. He let the words settle, feeling the eyes of the table and the entire room on him. He had to respond, and his response had to be sharp, surgical, and final. He couldn't just counter, he had to outmaneuver. He had to show them all that his power wasn't in shouting, but in thinking. A new framework, you say? Max asked, his voice low. That's very generous of you, George. And you've been working on this with who? The very people who created the system in the first place? The ones you claim to want to reform? That's not changing things from within. That's asking permission to sit at the same table and eat the same scraps. Russell's perfect smile faltered for the first time. The dart had missed, and the blade had turned. You see, Max continued, his voice rising just enough to carry, the problem isn't the lack of a new framework. The problem is the foundation. You can build a new house, but if the foundation is rotting, it's all going to collapse. And your proposal, George, is just a new coat of paint on a rotting building. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone still strained to hear. The system needs to be rebuilt, brick by brick, not with proposals, but with action. And you're not a part of the solution, George. You're still a part of the problem, because you're still talking to the very people who created the problem, the ones who are right here in this room. He gestured with a subtle flick of his hand towards the FIA officials and the team principals, and for a moment, a wave of palpable shock went through the gala. Russell's face went pale. He had walked into the lion's den, thinking he was the lion, and had just been reminded that he was still on the menu. Before Russell could recover, before he could form a response, Max delivered the final, devastating blow. You came here to put me on the defensive, George. You came here to show them you're the one who can control the narrative. But you just proved my point. You're playing by their rules, and that's a game you can never truly win, because the game is rigged. He stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor, the sound a punctuation mark on the end of his statement. He had said all he needed to say. He had delivered his message not just to Russell, but to everyone in the room. He walked away, leaving Russell at the table, a man caught in a moment of public humiliation, his careful facade in tatters. As Max left the grand ballroom, the night felt cooler, the air clearer. He had faced the gauntlet and hadn't just survived, he had triumphed. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been won. He had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the old guard and had shown everyone that he was not just a driver. He was a force to be reckoned with, a political architect building a new future on the ruins of the old. And he was just getting started. The silence Max left in his wake was a physical thing, a vacuum in the celebratory din of the Apex Gala. He didn't look back. There was no need. He could feel George Russell's stunned humiliation like a heat source from across the room. He had not only won the exchange, he had done so with a public, unequivocal statement that stripped away the pretense of Russell's manufactured authority. Max had shown everyone that he saw through the facade, and more importantly, that he was willing to call it what it was. But a victory in one skirmish did not win the war. Max knew that better than anyone. As he made his way to the private terrace, away from the watchful eyes and performative smiles, he felt the adrenaline of the confrontation give way to a cold, hard sense of reality. Russell would not forget this. The old guard would not forget this. His words were a gauntlet thrown down, and the response would be swift and brutal. He found Christian, his team principal, standing on the terrace, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Christian had a knack for finding the quiet corners, a skill born of years of navigating the political minefields of Formula One. He looked at Max, his face a complex mix of exasperation and grudging respect. "You couldn't help yourself, could you?" Christian said, exhaling a plume of smoke into the cool night air. "Why would I?" Max replied, leaning against the cold stone railing. "He came for me. He walked into my space, in front of all those people, and tried to paint me as the villain. I'm not going to play his game." Christian took another drag. "It's not just his game, Max. It's their game. All of them. The FIA, the old money, the other teams. They saw him as the solution. The one who could bring you back into the fold. The one who could tame the rebel. And you just neutered their golden boy on live television." Max allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Then they should have chosen a smarter golden boy." "This isn't about smarts anymore," Christian said, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "It's about control. You've challenged their power directly, Max. Not just in the paddock, but on a global stage. The sport's image, their sponsorships, their influence, it's all tied to the narrative, and you're rewriting the script." He was right. Max knew that. The old system was a carefully constructed fiction, a story of fair play and sporting glory that masked a reality of backroom deals and preferential treatment. His single, defiant act was a pinprick that had threatened to pop the entire balloon. He had used his platform, his credibility, his unmatched success to shine a light on the hypocrisy, and the powers that be would not stand for it. The next day, the public response was a tidal wave. Social media was ablaze. "Max Verstappen destroys George Russell with savage comeback" became the top trending topic. The traditional media, however, was more measured, more insidious. The headlines were carefully crafted to frame Max as reckless and self-serving. "Max's arrogance threatens to divide F1," one major publication's headline read. "Is Verstappen a liability for the sport?" asked another. It was a brilliant countermove, a coordinated smear campaign that Max recognized instantly. They couldn't win the argument on substance, so they would attack his character. Russell, meanwhile, was being presented as the wounded statesman, the man of reason and diplomacy who had been unfairly attacked by a ruthless upstart. The narrative was being flipped. The Apex Gala had been Max's battlefield, but the media was theirs. Max spent the next few days in a state of high alert. Every interview request was a potential trap. Every public appearance was a minefield. His team's PR department, now on high alert, was a flurry of activity, trying to mitigate the damage. But Max refused to apologize, refused to back down. To do so would be to cede the moral high ground, to admit that he had been wrong, and he knew he hadn't. The real blow came a week later, not through the media, but through a formal channel. Max received an email from the FIA, a polite but firm notice that he was being summoned to a private hearing. The subject: a review of driver conduct and public representation of the sport. The hearing was to be held at the headquarters of the Silver Star, the sport's most powerful and exclusive financial institution, one that had deep ties to both the FIA and Russell's team. Max knew exactly what this was. It was the trap. The Silver Star was an old name, a whisper in the corridors of power. It wasn't just a bank. It was the unseen hand that moved the sport's money, the keeper of the coffers, and the silent partner in every major deal. They held the purse strings, And now, they were going to use those strings to hang Max out to dry. They weren't going to fine him. They weren't going to ban him. They were going to do something far more damaging. They were going to make him complicit. The hearing was set for a private room at the Silver Star's London headquarters. Max, accompanied by his lawyer and Christian, walked into a room that felt less like an office and more like a mausoleum. The walls were lined with dark mahogany, and the light from the tall windows was filtered and dim. At the head of the long table sat Marcus Thorne, the quiet kingmaker from the gala, his face impassive. Beside him were Helena, the head of FIA Finance, and two other men Max didn't recognize, but who radiated power. At the far end of the table, looking calm and in control, sat George Russell. Russell offered a small, knowing smile. He had set the trap, and now he was here to watch Max walk into it. He was the one who had tipped them off, the one who had presented Max's outburst as a breach of conduct. He was playing the long game, using Max's own defiance against him. Marcus Thorne began the proceedings with a soft, almost paternal voice. "Max, thank you for coming. We're not here to punish you. We're here to understand. We're here to find a path forward. Your words at the gala, they caused a great deal of concern. You implied that the system is corrupt, that we, the guardians of the sport, are working against the best interests of the fans, the teams, and the drivers." "I didn't imply it," Max said, his voice steady. "I stated it. The system is built to protect the powerful and marginalize the rest." Helena, the finance head, interjected, her voice sharp. "And yet, Max, you are at the very pinnacle of that system. You have benefited from its rewards. You have won championships. You have earned millions of dollars. Your success, in a way, is a testament to the system you seek to tear down." This was the trap. They were going to use his success as a weapon. They were going to force him to choose his principles or his career. If he admitted the system was corrupt, he was admitting that his own victories were tainted. If he defended his victories, he was defending the system. It was a classic heads I win, tails you lose scenario. Max looked at Russell, who was watching him with a smug, expectant look. Russell had thought this through. He had seen the weakness, the flaw in Max's armor, and he had exploited it with ruthless efficiency. Max took a slow, deliberate breath. He had to be smarter. He couldn't just play defense. He had to turn the tables to use their own trap against them. He had to find a third option. "My success," Max began, his voice calm, "is not a testament to the system. It's a testament to the fact that talent, hard work, and determination can, on rare occasions, overcome a flawed system. The rules exist, and I abide by them. I push them to their limit, yes, but I do not break them. My team, my engineers, they work within the confines of the rules, even when those rules are unjust. My success is proof that even in a rigged game, a player can still win if he is better than everyone else." He paused, letting his words sink in. He wasn't defending the system. He was making his victory a testament to his own brilliance, to his team's brilliance, and a condemnation of the system's failure to contain it. He had created a new narrative. His success was an anomaly, a proof of the system's flaws, not its strength. He then turned his attention to Russell. "And what about you, George?" he said, his voice dripping with a subtle challenge. "You say you're working for change from within, but what have you done? You've given them a proposal that they will, in the end, bury in red tape. You've come here to help them silence me, to prove your loyalty to the very people who hold your leash. You want to be a part of the solution, but you're still waiting for them to tell you what the solution is." Max leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Thorne. "I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I'm here to state my terms. You can't stop me from speaking the truth. You can't stop the fans from seeing it. The old order is dying. And you can either stand in the way and be crushed by the new, or you can step aside and let us build something better. My challenge isn't just to you, it's to the system, and it is a challenge from all the engineers, all the mechanics, and all the fans who are tired of the old ways. And no amount of public relations will change that. He stood up, his gaze sweeping the room, from Thorne to Helena to the two silent men. He finally rested his eyes on Russell, a look of pity, not anger, on his face. He had outsmarted him again. Russell had tried to trap him, but Max had turned the trap into a stage, a platform for a much bigger, much more powerful message. "I'm done here," Max said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The choice is yours." As Max walked out, leaving a trail of stunned silence, he knew the war was far from over. But he had just won the biggest battle yet. He had stared down the old guard in their own home, on their own terms, and had walked away victorious. He had not just survived the trap of the Silver Star. He had dismantled it piece by piece, right in front of the people who had built it. The game had changed, and Max was the one setting the new rules. The streets of London were a blur of rain and neon as Max's car cut through the evening traffic. Inside the silent vehicle, the world of the Silver Star hearing felt 1,000 miles away, yet it was closer than ever. The victory was hollow, a temporary reprieve. He had won the battle in that room, but the war was still raging, and he knew his opponents would not be so careless as to confront him directly again. They had learned their lesson. Christian, sitting beside him, was a storm of contained energy. "You were brilliant, Max," he said, the words a strained testament to his relief. "They had no idea what to do. You took their argument and turned it on them." "It was never their argument," Max said, his voice flat. "It was George's. He's the one who set the trap. He's the one who convinced them this was the way to break me." The knowledge of Russell's betrayal had been a cold, bitter pill to swallow. Their rivalry had always been fierce, but it had existed within the accepted boundaries of competition. This was different. This was personal, a calculated move to not just defeat him, but to ruin him. Max had seen it in Russell's smug smile, in the way he had watched with such anticipation. The hurt was a dull ache beneath the surface of his victory. "What's next?" Christian asked, his voice filled with a weary anticipation. "They won't just let this go. Thorne won't. George won't. They're wounded now, and a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind." "They'll change their tactics," Max said, staring out at the blurred city lights. "They'll stop coming at me head-on. They'll try to get to me another way." And he was right. The direct attacks stopped. The coordinated media campaign faded into a soft hum of background noise. The silence that followed was more unsettling than the noise had been. It was the quiet before the storm. Max felt a psychological pressure building, a sense of being watched, of waiting for the invisible blow. Over the next few weeks, a subtle, insidious campaign began. It didn't target Max directly, but it targeted everything around him. His team was suddenly under an unprecedented level of scrutiny from the FIA's technical and financial departments. Inspections became more frequent, more invasive. Every minor detail was scrutinized, every expense questioned. The pressure was a slow-drip torture, designed to create a sense of paranoia and exhaust his team's resources. Christian was working around the clock, fighting battles on a dozen different fronts. Then came the second volley. It was directed at his personal life, a slow, methodical chipping away at his reputation. Anonymous rumors began to surface on obscure blogs and in thinly veiled articles in tabloid publications. They were nothing concrete, just whispers of excessive spending, of late-night parties, of a lack of focus. They were designed not to be provable, but to create a cloud of suspicion, to muddy the narrative. The public, who had championed him as a rebel, began to see a different picture, that of a spoiled, entitled playboy. The most cutting blow was a leaked, out-of-context audio clip from an old conversation with Lando Norris. In it, Max was heard making a sarcastic comment about a struggling backmarker team. The clip, deliberately edited, made him sound callous and dismissive. It was a masterpiece of political sabotage. It turned the public, the very fans he was fighting for, against him. Max's phone was suddenly silent. The roar of public support had gone quiet, replaced by a deafening hum of online outrage. Max felt the walls closing in, the media scrutiny, the constant surveillance on his team, and now the personal attacks. It was all designed to isolate him, to make him feel alone. He knew Russell and Lando were behind it, a silent partnership in his destruction. They didn't need to speak to him. They were fighting a war of perception, and they were winning. Max retreated to his home, a sanctuary that was starting to feel like a prison. He spent hours poring over old race data, not for performance gains, but for an escape from the psychological torment. He needed to understand the game they were playing, the unspoken gambit. He knew it was something big, something he was missing. It wasn't about the scrutiny or the rumors. Those were just distractions, smoke and mirrors to hide the real attack. He started with what he knew: Lando Norris. Lando was the key. He wasn't a man of open confrontation like Russell. He was a master of the subtle, the unseen. He used charm and public persona as a cloak for a mind as sharp as a scalpel. Max thought back to their conversation at the gala. Lando's comment about playing the game. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Lando wasn't trying to beat Max with brute force. He was trying to outthink him, to play a game Max didn't even know was happening. Then it clicked. The rumors, the financial scrutiny, the public whispers, they weren't the attack. They were the setup. The target wasn't Max's reputation. The target was his team. The financial pressure, the constant drain on resources, the time and effort spent fighting the FIA. It was all designed to weaken his team, to make them vulnerable. But for what? The answer came to him one night, a sudden jolt of clarity. It wasn't about Max. It was about Christian. The unspoken gambit was a play to force a leadership change at his team, to replace Christian with a figurehead they could control. Christian was the bulwark, the man who had always protected Max and given him the space to be himself. Without him, Max would be exposed, his power diminished, his platform silenced. It was a chess move of the highest order. The media attacks on Max were a feint. The real target was the knight on the board, the team principal who protected the king. The next morning, Max walked into Christian's office, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Christian was exhausted, his face etched with fatigue. He was on the phone with the FIA, his voice a tight coil of frustration. "They're going for you, Christian," Max said, cutting him off. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about you. They want to force a change in leadership. They want to get rid of you." Christian's eyes widened, a dawning horror on his face. He had been so focused on fighting the individual battles that he hadn't seen the war. Max's revelation was a gut punch, but it was also a lifeline. It brought the chaos into focus, gave it a name, a shape. They spent the next several hours in a flurry of intense, quiet conversation. They needed a plan, a countermove to a gambit that had been weeks in the making. They had to be proactive, not reactive. They had to hit back, and they had to do it where they were least expected. "We need to go public," Christian said, his voice firm. "We need to tell the world what they're doing. The fans will rally behind us." "No," Max said, shaking his head. "That's what they want. They want to turn this into another public spectacle, another divisive moment. We have to be smarter. We have to use their rules against them." Max's mind was working a mile a minute, connecting the dots. The silver star, the FIA, the financial regulations. He had a memory of a conversation he had with a senior journalist, a woman named Isabella, who had a reputation for being fiercely independent and connected to the deepest sources in the sport. He remembered a detail she had mentioned, a small, seemingly insignificant change to a financial protocol. At the time, he had dismissed it. Now, it was the key. He picked up his phone and called her. He didn't explain, didn't give her the full picture. He just gave her the pieces, the breadcrumbs. He talked about the FIA's increased scrutiny on teams, the unprecedented level of auditing. He gave her the name of the new financial protocol and a specific, innocuous-sounding loophole within it. He was giving her a fishing line, a baited hook, and he knew she would know exactly where to cast it. The next day, Isabella's article broke. It wasn't a headline-grabbing exposé. It was a meticulously researched, highly detailed piece that explained the new financial protocol and how its loophole could be used to quietly benefit certain teams, particularly those with deep financial ties to the Silver Star. She didn't mention Russell or Thorne or Max directly. She didn't have to. The facts spoke for themselves. She detailed how this new protocol could lead to a massive, under-the-table transfer of funds, a corruption far more insidious than a minor overspending breach. The article didn't cause a public uproar. It caused something far more powerful, a quiet, chilling wave of realization in the corridors of power. The teams that had been benefiting from the unspoken gambit saw their secret exposed. The FIA, caught red-handed, was suddenly on the defensive. The quiet kingmaker, Marcus Thorne, was no longer quiet. He was scrambling. Max's countermove had been a masterpiece. He hadn't fought the battle they had set for him. He had bypassed it entirely, striking at the very foundation of their power. He had used the system's own rules, its own complex language, to expose its corruption from the inside. He had not only survived the trap, he had turned it back on its creators. As Max watched the news from a quiet, unseen corner, he saw the faces of Russell and Lando flash across the screen. They were being asked about the new report, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the pressure of a question they weren't prepared for. They were the ones on the defensive now, their unspoken gambit now a very public and very damaging scandal. Max felt a sense of vindication, a powerful, quiet justice. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had the upper hand. He hadn't just outsmarted them, he had outthought them, proving that in this new war, the most powerful weapon was not brute force or public opinion, but pure, unadulterated strategy. The morning after Isabella's article, the silence was broken not by a whisper, but by a symphony of panic. Max watched the news from a quiet corner of his team's headquarters, a single cup of tea steaming on the table. The digital world was on fire. The meticulously researched, clinical tone of Isabella's reporting had given it a gravity that no tabloid headline ever could. It wasn't a rumor or a scandal, it was an audit. And the findings were damning. The teams implicated in the unspoken gambit were scrambling. Max watched as their team principals, typically so composed and polished, stammered through press conferences, their explanations flimsy and unconvincing. The FIA, caught between a rock and a hard place, issued a terse statement promising a full and comprehensive review of all financial protocols. Marcus Thorne, the quiet kingmaker, was no longer quiet. His office was a hive of frantic activity, his phone a constant buzzing lifeline to the crumbling power structures he had so carefully maintained. The true spectacle, however, was George Russell. His image as the diplomatic reformer, the new face of the sport, was in tatters. The very loophole Max had exposed was a direct link to his own team's financial backer, the Silver Star. Russell had not only been a pawn in a rigged game, he had been a willing participant, his grand proposal now exposed as a cynical feint. The same media that had championed him as a statesman now ran headlines questioning his integrity. He tried to save face, giving a live interview where he spoke in vague platitudes about a misunderstanding and industry complexities. But his words were empty, a final, desperate performance for an audience that had lost its faith. Lando, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Max knew why. Lando was too smart for a public display of shame. He was a strategic thinker, a man who saw the chessboard for what it was. He had been outplayed, and he knew it. His silence was not shame. It was a grudging respect, an acknowledgement of a defeat that had been orchestrated with a cold, devastating precision he himself would have admired. The silence from his opponents was a new kind of power, a vacuum that Max intended to fill. This wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about ensuring the fight never had to happen again. He had the high ground, and he was going to use it to rebuild the system from the inside out. He convened an emergency meeting with Christian. "They're on the ropes," Max said. "The FIA is weak, Thorne is exposed, and George is irrelevant. This is our moment, not to win a championship, but to win the war for the sport itself." Christian, his face for the first time in weeks free of worry, nodded. "What's the move, Max?" "We call a press conference," Max said, a glint in his eye. "Not a defensive one, a proactive one. We don't talk about the past, we talk about the future." Max spent the next few hours working on a statement with Christian and his lawyers. It wasn't a list of accusations. It was a manifesto. It was a series of concrete, actionable demands for a new era of transparency. He outlined a plan for a new, independent financial oversight committee, one with no ties to any team or financial institution. He demanded a complete overhaul of the power structures that gave a select few disproportionate control. He called for a fundamental rewrite of the governance rules, a new social contract that put the sport, the drivers, and the fans first. The press conference was a global event. The tension in the room was palpable. The world's media, the team principals, and the FIA officials who had once held so much power were all there, a captive audience. Max walked to the podium, his presence commanding the room without a single word. He was not there as a driver, but as a leader, a force for change. He didn't start with a dramatic accusation. He started with a simple truth. "For too long," he began, his voice clear and steady, "this sport has been run from the shadows. The rules were a labyrinth, and only a select few had the map. We have all benefited from the passion of the fans, the work of the engineers, and the courage of the drivers. But the system was broken, and last week we proved it." He laid out the details, not of his opponent's failures, but of his vision. He used the language of justice, fairness, and accountability. He presented a plan so detailed, so logical, that it was impossible to dismiss. He showed them all that he hadn't just exposed a weakness, he had prepared a solution. He was not just a destroyer, he was a builder. He concluded his statement by looking directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. "This isn't a negotiation," he said. "This is a choice. You can either stand on the wrong side of history, defending a system that has been exposed for what it is, or you can stand with us, with the fans, and help build a new, fairer future for this sport. The world is watching. The choice is yours." As the camera bulbs flashed, he could see the faces in the crowd. The FIA officials were pale, their power drained. Thorne's face was a mask of defeat, and in a quiet corner, Max saw George Russell and Lando Norris, their expressions a mix of anger and awe. They had tried to trap him, to break him, to turn his own success against him. But he had not only survived, he had turned their trap into the very instrument of their downfall. The reckoning was swift. The pressure from the teams, the sponsors, and the fans was too great to ignore. Within a week, the FIA announced a complete restructuring. Marcus Thorne resigned from his positions. A new independent oversight committee was formed. The changes Max had demanded were being implemented one by one. The old guard was out, and a new era of transparency and fairness was beginning. Max had not just outsmarted his rivals, he had outthought the entire system. He had shown that in a world of political intrigue and quiet corruption, the most powerful weapon was not money or influence, but a clear vision, a powerful platform, and the unwavering courage to speak the truth. He had won the war, not just for himself, but for the soul of the sport he loved, and in doing so, he had become more than a champion. He had become a legend.